Trapped in a deadly winter storm, the wind screamed across the frozen plains, and an exhausted wild Mustang named Ghost stood over his fallen friend, refusing to leave him behind even as the blizzard threatened to swallow them both. Before we get into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe for more tales like this one. We upload every day at the same time. The storm was a sudden, merciless force, and the herd of Mustangs had been galloping for hours in a desperate effort to outrun its blinding fury. Icy flakes scoured their coats and stung their nostrils, and their hooves broke through the crusted surface of the snow, making every step a struggle for traction. Ghost led the way, his muscles rippling beneath his jet-black coat, ears pinned back as he concentrated on pushing through the gusts that almost toppled the weaker horses in the herd. He was the strongest and most experienced stallion, respected and even feared by the others for his cunning and fierce devotion to their survival. But the world around them was becoming a death trap of swirling white, the ground indistinguishable from the sky, and the temperature falling so fast that it felt like every inhale of breath was a stab of ice in their lungs. Visibility was almost gone. All that remained was the howling wind and the drifting outlines of panicked Mustangs. Ghost knew they had to keep moving or risk being buried alive by the drifts or frozen in place. He urged the herd onward, his eyes barely open, trusting instincts and the memory of open plains and hidden valleys. Then it happened, a crack beneath the hooves of his closest companion, Storm, a powerful young Mustang who had run at Ghost's side for many harrowing journeys across these plains. Storm's forelegs slipped into a hidden pocket of ice, sending him tumbling with a shrill cry that cut through the gale. The sound of a horse going down, a sickening lurch, a whinny of pain, sent lightning through Ghost's veins. In an instant the herd kept moving, for they had to, but Ghost did not. He skidded to a stop, his chest heaving, nostrils flaring in the biting air. Storm lay in the snow, eyes wide with shock, trying to scramble to his feet but failing. Ghost pivoted, circling Storm and pawing frantically at the ice that had formed around the younger Mustang's leg. The rest of the herd vanished into the icy haze, their survival instincts guiding them toward any possible shelter. But Ghost couldn't leave Storm behind. That was not in his nature. They had survived encounters with cougars, raging rivers, and human encroachment, always side by side. Now, as the storm's fury pressed upon them like a colossal weight, Ghost refused to abandon his fallen friend. Each breath Ghost took was ragged, releasing a plume of steam that instantly scattered in the wind. He braced his shoulder against Storm's body, trying to help him rise. Storm managed to lift his forequarters for a moment, his eyes wild with pain, but his injured leg folded beneath him, sending him crashing back down with a startled cry. The snow around them began to pile up, pushed by relentless gusts, threatening to trap both horses if they stayed still too long. Ghost was torn by instinct. Every fiber in his body screamed that he should keep moving. Horses that stand still in a storm risk losing blood flow to their limbs, risk the snow piling up around them until they can't break free, risk the wolves smelling their vulnerability. Yet deeper than that primal call was the bond he had with Storm, who had once saved him from a rattlesnake bite by alerting the herd with a frantic whinny. Storm was more than a fellow Mustang, he was a companion, a friend. Ghost snorted and dug at the snow around Storm's leg, trying to clear the ice. But the cold was intense, and Storm was trembling. If he couldn't stand, they would both freeze. Ghost lowered his head and pressed his muzzle against Storm's neck, as though encouraging him to rise. Storm's ears flicked back, and he let out a gentle nicker, acknowledging Ghost's presence, but he remained helpless on the ground. The wind changed direction, blasting Ghost's flank and sending shards of ice against his face. He jerked his head up, scanning the horizon, though all he saw was a maelstrom of white. Time felt suspended in the storm, as though the world were reduced to a single point where the two horses existed, struggling against nature's brutal grip. The swirling flurries created ghostly illusions that seemed to dance at the edges of Ghost's vision, making him momentarily think that the herd had returned. But no, they were alone. He stomped a hoof in frustration, sending bits of ice flying. With gritted determination, he resumed nudging Storm, pressing his body against Storm's side, attempting to leverage his own weight to lift Storm back onto his hooves. Storm groaned, his breath coming in ragged gasps, each plume of hot air snatched away by the wind as soon as it left his nostrils. He tried again to stand, and for a moment, it seemed he might make it. His muscles bunched, his good legs scrabbling in the churned snow, until he nearly found footing. But the injured limb buckled the instant he tried to put weight on it, toppling him sideways with a pained whinny. Ghost let out a deep, resonant sound, a mix of frustration and protective fury. They had no time. The storm was growing worse, and soon the night would come, bringing even deadlier cold. Somewhere ahead, the herd would be seeking shelter among the scattered rock formations or the sparse stands of pine, but here, in this endless expanse of open land, there was nothing to block the wind. Ghost tried to dig again, half to free Storm's leg and half to show Storm some meager patch of frozen grass to sustain him. His hooves struck the compacted drifts. Slowly, bit by bit, he cleared a small area, revealing a brittle tuft of lifeless grass. He pawed at it, as though urging Storm to eat and regain strength. Storm managed to stretch his neck forward and nibble at the meager resource, chewing slowly, eyes fluttering with exhaustion. It wasn't much, but it was something. Ghost snorted and looked around again, ears swiveling in every direction. With the howling wind, it was near impossible to hear anything else, but he sensed a presence in the distance. A primal alarm shot through him. There were other eyes out there in the whiteness, eyes that glowed with hunger and opportunism. Predators. Wolves, perhaps, or coyotes. The scent of helpless prey would be unmistakable, even in a storm. He remembered past winters when the wolves came silently, their padded feet making no sound on the snow. They would test the herd, seeking the old or weak. Ghost had faced them before, always with a group. Now he had no herd to stand with him, only Storm, injured and vulnerable. Despite the cruelty of the cold, Ghost's blood felt hot, adrenaline coursing through him. He pawed the ground in warning, ears laid back, scanning for any sign of movement in the shifting curtains of blowing snow. For a long moment, only the wind answered. Then, faint as a whisper, a distant howl drifted across the plains. Ghost's heart pounded. He stomped once, twice, as if threatening the unseen enemy to keep its distance. Storm flicked his ear at the sound, letting out a trembling snort. The storm hammered down, and Ghost had to keep moving around Storm to prevent his legs from going numb. Every so often, he tried again to lift Storm, but each attempt failed, Storm's leg too hurt to support him. The snow around them rose to mid-cannon height on Ghost, and nearly engulfed Storm's body when he lay prone. Ghost raked the ground again, clearing space so Storm wouldn't be completely buried. Each time he did, the wind would sweep more snow right back. They were fighting a losing battle, but Ghost refused to give up. The memory of running side by side, cresting hills in the summer sun, chasing each other through rolling fields of grass, those moments pushed him to keep trying. Storm had always been there. Now Ghost would be there, no matter the cost. As time crawled forward, the temperature plummeted, and the light began to fade, turning the sky into a gray blur. Daylight was nearly gone. Ghost's breath came in labored bursts, and he had to shift his weight constantly to avoid succumbing to the cold. Storm's eyes began to droop, and that was even more frightening than the wolves' howls. If Storm slipped into unconsciousness, he might never rise again. Ghost pressed his muzzle against Storm's cheek, breathing warm air across Storm's face, as if trying to keep him awake. Storm blinked slowly, a gesture of gratitude, but it was clear that his strength was waning. Another howl echoed, closer this time, and Ghost's ears snapped forward. He let out a sharp warning cry, rearing onto his hind legs, front hooves pawing at the air as though to ward off any lurking predator. The wind seized that challenge and carried it across the plains. If the wolves were out there, they now knew exactly where he and Storm were. Ghost landed back down, sides heaving. He considered stepping away from Storm to force the wolves to chase him, maybe to lure them away. But any distance might be the final blow for Storm, who was already on the brink of freezing and needed Ghost's warmth, his protection. Torn by indecision, Ghost stayed close, circling Storm and trying to keep his own limbs warm by never stopping his restless pacing. The swirling snow was so thick that it clung to their coats in clumps. Icicles formed around their muzzles, giving them a frosty, spectral appearance. The night was almost fully upon them. Each second that passed felt like an hour. Every heartbeat pounded with the dread that if they didn't find shelter or at least keep Storm alive until help, some kind of help, arrived, there would be no tomorrow for either of them. Suddenly, a movement caught Ghost's eye. A dark shape glided through the wind-driven snow, then another. The silhouettes were low to the ground, slinking with predatory intent. Wolves, indeed? Their primal eyes latched onto the scene, 2 horses, one down, both vulnerable, pinned by the tempest. Ghost snorted furiously and stamped, letting out an ear-splitting scream that sliced through the wind's roar. The wolves paused but didn't retreat. They sensed an opportunity. In the world of predators and prey, a horse that cannot stand is as good as a meal. Yet they also saw Ghost, massive and strong, his muscles tensed with defiance. They didn't dare rush in without testing him first. One of the wolves let out a bark-like call, and the others spread out, trying to flank Ghost. Storm let out a fearful neigh, scrabbling at the snow, as if sensing the threat but still unable to rise. Ghost flung himself forward, charging the nearest wolf with a burst of speed that belied his exhaustion. The wolf danced backward, snarling, but stayed just out of reach. Ghost wheeled around, sending loose snow flying, breath steaming from his nostrils in rapid bursts. The other wolves crept closer to Storm, and Ghost had to rush back, placing himself between his friend and the predators. This was how they would try to wear him down. They would feint and maneuver, forcing him to expend precious energy until he could no longer protect Storm. Then they'd close in for the kill. Ghost needed to strike fear into them somehow, make them think attacking would cost too much. But he was only one horse, and Storm was no longer able to defend himself. Fear gnawed at Ghost's mind, a rare emotion for a stallion who usually exuded confidence. Yet fear can spark survival instincts like nothing else. The wolves snarled, jaws parted, tongues lolling in the freezing air. One advanced a step, teeth bared, while another circled to the side, seeking a blind spot. Ghost lashed out with his hind legs at the closer wolf, the crack of his hooves snapping through the storm. The wolf darted back, missing a direct hit but receiving a glancing blow that sent it yelping. The pack paused again, evaluating the situation. Ghost stayed braced, head lowered in an aggressive stance, ears pinned back, ready to fight to the bitter end. Storm's breathing was ragged, his eyes rolling with terror, but seeing Ghost stand firm seemed to give him a shred of hope, even if he couldn't stand. The confrontation stretched across the howling darkness, each side testing the other's resolve. Eventually, the wolves drifted away into the swirling snow, perhaps waiting for Ghost to drop his guard or collapse from exhaustion. Ghost allowed himself a moment to relax, though his heart thundered. Even though they had chased the wolves back for now, the night was long and the storm unrelenting. Without shelter, he and Storm were at a severe disadvantage. Ghost bent down and pressed his muzzle to Storm's side, letting out a soft nicker that he hoped conveyed reassurance. Storm's eyes flickered. The younger Mustang tried yet again to rise, groaning through clenched teeth as he put weight on his injured leg. Ghost tried to support him, muscles straining. This time Storm managed to get his front legs up, and for a breathless second, it appeared he would stagger upright. His hind legs braced in the snow, pushing with what little strength remained. Then that wounded front leg buckled again, sending him crashing onto his knees. Ghost neighed in frustration, the sound echoing over the barren expanse. They could not stay here forever. But how could Ghost possibly move Storm if Storm couldn't walk on his own? Ghost had no answer. All he had was determination, a refusal to abandon the one who had run with him through so many dangers. In the pitiless realm of nature, such loyalty was rare, often overshadowed by each creature's desperate push for personal survival. Yet Ghost stayed, come what may, a lone sentinel in a frozen wasteland. The wind roared like a living thing, tearing at Ghost's mane and tail. The temperature sank further, burrowing into their bones. It felt like a lifetime had passed, though it had only been hours. They were drenched in sweat beneath their ice-crusted coats, and Storm's trembling had turned to near total immobility, as if his body was losing the fight to stay warm. A strange haze fell over Ghost's mind, a creeping numbness that both lulled and threatened him. He shook his head fiercely, stomping his hooves to keep the blood flowing. Falling asleep in these conditions would be a death sentence. He had to stay vigilant for Storm's sake, and his own. He forced himself to move constantly, pacing, nudging Storm, pawing the snow. Anything to fend off the creeping embrace of hypothermia. He sensed the wolves out there, watching, waiting for weakness. Another distant howl confirmed his suspicion. They were biding their time. Ghost was on the razor's edge between exhaustion and unwavering loyalty, fully aware that if the wolves came in force, there would be precious little he could do to save Storm, or himself. But there was no alternative. Abandoning Storm was unthinkable. Ghost whinnied, a piercing cry that might reach the ears of any Mustang from the herd who dared to return, or maybe reach some human who roamed the land. But the response was silence, save for the rage of the storm. The darkness was absolute now, the sky an endless swirl of white flakes whipping in every direction, illuminated faintly by the feeble moonlight that struggled to penetrate the clouds. Ghost huddled beside Storm, the warmth of their bodies pressed together offering the slightest reprieve. Storm's breathing was shallow, and his eyelids drooped, but he was alive. For the moment, they both were. In the terrifying expanse of winter night, Ghost wondered if morning would ever come. Yet as the hours dragged on, the wind finally began to ease, just a fraction. The drifts that had been whirling around settled to the ground. The air was still bitterly cold, and the wolves were undoubtedly still near, but the punishing blasts lessened somewhat. Ghost took advantage of the lull to try lifting Storm again. He pressed his shoulder into Storm's side, pushing with every bit of strength. With a groan, Storm heaved himself up, propped on 3 legs, the injured one barely touching the ground. He swayed precariously, and Ghost quickly steadied him, standing close so Storm could lean. Even upright, Storm was in no shape to run or fight, but at least he wasn't lying helpless in the snow. Ghost gave a small neigh of encouragement, stepping forward as if to say, "Follow me." Storm limped a step, almost collapsing as pain shot through his leg. But Ghost insisted, nudging him forward again. They had to find some depression in the land, some small cluster of rocks, anything that could offer protection from the wind. The night around them was a maze of drifts and shadows, and Storm's progress was agonizingly slow. Every few feet, he had to pause and brace himself. But each step was a triumph. They were moving, not simply waiting to die. Ghost kept his ears pricked for the wolves, occasionally tossing his head to scan the swirling darkness for their glowing eyes. The thought of leading Storm out here was terrifying, but remaining in one place was certain death. The wind gusted again, filling their nostrils with stinging flakes and burying their tracks almost as soon as they made them. Ghost guided Storm in what he hoped was a direction away from deeper drifts, trying to recall the land's contours from earlier that day, back when they could still see. Perhaps half an hour passed, though it felt longer, and no sanctuary appeared. Storm's trembling intensified, and his limp became worse. Several times he stumbled, and Ghost hurried to brace him. It seemed futile, but Ghost refused to accept defeat. Then came the faint, eerie chorus of howls again, and this time it was closer than before. Storm's ears flicked, and he let out a frantic snort. The predators were done waiting. Ghost picked up his pace, adrenaline sparking new energy in him. He herded Storm forward, practically pushing him, ignoring the younger horse's anguished whimpers. The plain seemed endless, and the swirling snow obscured any landmarks that might help them. Behind them, shadows moved in the darkness. Storm lurched, nearly going down again, and Ghost wedged himself under Storm's neck to keep him upright. The wolves were on the approach, more confident now. They likely smelled the blood from Storm's injured leg, an undeniable invitation to feast. Ghost pawed at the snow, ears pinned, letting out a furious squeal. 3 wolves, their eyes reflecting a ghostly glow, emerged within visual range, trotting lightly across the snow. Their breaths steamed in the moonlight, and their bodies were lean with winter hunger. Ghost stomped toward them in a show of aggression, but they fanned out, surrounding him and Storm. A flash of movement to Ghost's left, another pair of wolves slinking into position. The pack was at least 5 strong, maybe more. Storm could barely stand, his sides heaving, each breath filled with fear. A low, rumbling growl came from one wolf, answered by another. They circled closer, black silhouettes in the swirling white backdrop. Ghost threatened them with a snaking head and bared teeth. He kicked out behind him in a warning. The wolves kept circling, patient and deadly, like living nightmares. One lunged forward to test Ghost's reaction. Ghost snapped, teeth clacking, and the wolf jumped back. Another advanced from the rear. Ghost spun around, but that left Storm's flank exposed to the first wolf. Storm tried to swing his body away, but his injured leg gave out. In a moment of panic, he toppled sideways, and one wolf sprang for his throat. Ghost responded with lightning speed, lunging at the attacker and slamming his chest into the wolf's body. The wolf yelped and tumbled, but Storm was down again, defenseless. Time slowed as Ghost placed himself between Storm and the pack. 2 wolves closed in, fangs flashing. Ghost lashed out with his front hooves, striking the chest of one. A sickening thud sounded, and that wolf rolled away with a pained yelp. But the other leaped in, jaws snapping inches from Ghost's leg. The stallion felt teeth graze his skin, a hot spike of pain that made him rear up, thrashing wildly. Snow exploded around them in clouds. Storm struggled to rise, whinnying in terror, but he only succeeded in thrashing his good legs. The wolves circled, snarling. Ghost hammered down with his hooves, flinging snow in every direction, his heartbeat roaring in his ears. Another lunge from the left forced Ghost to pivot, presenting the right side of his body to the wolf that had circled around. He sensed a presence behind him, yet another wolf. They were trying to isolate Storm, who lay half buried in the churned snow, eyes wide with dread. Ghost kicked back with all the force he could muster. He heard a sharp yip, indicating he'd made contact. But the pack was unrelenting, spurred on by hunger and the smell of blood. Ghost knew he couldn't keep this up forever. Already fatigue burned in his muscles, and the savage winter cold was draining his strength. Storm's trembling form told him that time was running out for his friend, too. They were on the brink. A savage snarl rang out, and 2 wolves charged in unison, one from the front and one from behind. Ghost lunged to counter the frontal attack, biting fiercely, feeling fur and flesh. The wolf shrieked, but the other wolf's jaws clamped onto Ghost's rear flank for a brief, agonizing moment before the stallion spun. Warm blood trickled down Ghost's leg, steaming in the icy air. Another lunge at Storm made Ghost bolt forward, intercepting the predator with a blow to the side. Yet the wolves pressed on. Storm let out a weak cry, kicking his legs in a feeble attempt to defend himself as a wolf circled behind him. But just when it seemed all was lost, a new howl tore through the chaos, an unfamiliar tone, commanding and sharp. The wolves paused, their ears pricking, eyes darting toward the sound. A second howl answered, then a third. Ghost, bleeding and shaking, turned his head to see more dark shapes materialize against the snowy backdrop. Another wolf pack had entered the fray, possibly drawn by the commotion. Predators or not, wolves are territorial creatures, and intruders crossing boundary lines often leads to clashes. The attacking wolves instantly turned from Ghost and Storm, snarling in the direction of this new threat. The sound of snapping jaws and growls filled the night, building to a crescendo of chaos. In that desperate moment, Ghost saw a chance. He rushed back to Storm, pressing against him, pushing and nudging, forcing him upright. Storm stumbled, nearly toppled, but somehow remained on 3 quivering legs. The cacophony of the wolves' confrontation escalated as the second pack challenged the first. Ghost spared a glance back. The 2 packs engaged in a primal standoff, snapping and circling each other. Blood would likely be shed, but that conflict granted Ghost and Storm a precious window to escape. With unyielding determination, Ghost urged Storm forward, step by agonizing step, away from the savage brawl. Storm limped, leaning heavily on Ghost, every movement a test of will. Their labored progress across the snow felt endless. The wind still lashed them, though it had eased slightly since the storm's peak. The furious howls and snarls of wolves at war faded behind them, growing distant, until all that remained was the ragged sound of their own breath. Ghost could feel the warmth of blood matting his flank, but he pushed the pain aside. They were alive, both of them, and that was all that mattered. He caught the faint scent of pine, which meant they were nearing the outskirts of the valley where some scraggly trees might provide relief from the wind. They pushed on, the land rising gradually as they navigated around deep drifts. The effort drained whatever energy Storm had left, and he collapsed again, panting in shallow bursts. Ghost stood over him, scanning the darkness for any sign of the wolf packs. All he saw was the swirling snow and the vague outline of trees in the distance. He was torn between forging ahead and staying by Storm's side. But leaving Storm alone was no option, so Ghost did what he had done all night: he stayed. As the night wore on, the storm finally began to ebb. Thin moonlight filtered through ragged clouds, revealing the carnage of deep drifts and scoured plains. Ghost and Storm remained together, battered but still breathing. Dawn approached, a cold gray line on the horizon. The wolves had not returned, at least for now, and Ghost prayed in whatever way a wild horse can that they had survived the worst of this ordeal. The first hint of morning light found Ghost rousing Storm yet again. The younger Mustang opened his eyes, blinked, and snorted softly, as if surprised to still be alive. Slowly, painfully, he planted his good legs and struggled upright. Ghost supported him, letting Storm lean against his side. In the daylight, they could see the dark patches of dried blood on Ghost's flank and the way Storm's injured leg hung at an awkward angle. But they were up, and the morning air, though cold, no longer raged with blinding snow. Ghost scanned the land, spotting the line of trees not far away. If they could just make it there, maybe they'd find some natural windbreak, or a hollow to rest in. He nudged Storm forward. They began that slow, painful trek again, footprints left behind in the snow that sparkled under the newly emerged sun. They hadn't gone far when Ghost's ears pricked at a new sound, the distant hum of a snowmobile engine, faint but growing louder. A strange noise in this silent wilderness, it caused both Mustangs to freeze. Ghost's primal instincts told him to flee from the unknown, but Storm could barely move, and they had no chance of outrunning whatever approached. The hum intensified. Then, over a small rise, shapes appeared, 3 figures on snowmobiles, their engines echoing across the frosty expanse. Humans. Ghost snorted and backed away, placing himself protectively in front of Storm. The humans seemed to notice the horses and slowed to a cautious halt. They were dressed in heavy gear, goggles, and helmets, likely a rescue or conservation team. One raised a hand in a gesture of calm, dismounting the snowmobile and stepping forward carefully. Ghost snorted again, stamping a hoof, ears pinned. He wouldn't let them near Storm without a fight. The human paused, removing goggles and speaking in a gentle tone lost to the wind. Another person joined, whispering or murmuring so as not to startle the horses. Ghost regarded them with fierce eyes, but Storm swayed on his 3 good legs, close to collapsing once more. Perhaps sensing the dire situation, the humans moved slowly, extending their arms in a soothing manner, trying to show they meant no harm. Ghost tossed his head, sides still heaving. He remembered other encounters with humans, some that ended in terror, others that ended in captivity. But these humans seemed different, like they knew about Mustangs and respected them. Storm let out a pitiful groan and sank to his knees, no longer able to remain upright. Ghost neighed anxiously, stepping aside to circle him. The humans seized this chance to approach carefully. One knelt in the snow next to Storm, speaking softly, then gestured to the others. They retrieved equipment from the snowmobiles, including a blanket and what looked like a medical kit. Ghost pawed the ground, uncertain if he should attack or retreat, but Storm was beyond his ability to help now. The humans appeared to be offering assistance. Storm's breathing was shallow, and he flinched when the humans touched his injured leg. They examined him, hands gentle but firm, then exchanged concerned glances. One produced a syringe and carefully injected something into Storm's neck. Ghost recognized the smell of chemicals and let out a warning whinny, but the human remained calm, stroking Storm's mane in a reassuring gesture. Storm's eyes fluttered, and he went limp, sedation taking hold. Ghost braced himself, expecting the worst, but the humans gently spread out the blanket, strapping it to a makeshift sled behind one of the snowmobiles. They worked quickly and efficiently, mindful of Storm's injury and Ghost's protective presence. Once Storm was secured, the humans turned their attention to Ghost, who stood several yards away, ears pinned. A low, warning nicker slipped from his throat. The humans seemed to understand. They spoke softly, not advancing, giving him space. One of them pointed to Storm, then to Ghost, as if trying to say, "We're helping your friend." Ghost's wild heart hammered with conflict. The thought of letting these strangers take Storm away filled him with panic. But what choice was left? Storm couldn't even walk. Ghost knew if they stayed out here, Storm would die. So he lowered his head, taking a few tentative steps closer, sniffing the air, testing the humans' intent. They made no sudden moves. One slowly reached out a hand, palm up. Ghost snorted, snapping his teeth near the hand but not biting it. The human pulled back calmly. With Storm now unconscious, the rescuers fastened the sled to a snowmobile, preparing for transport. Another wave of primal fear crashed through Ghost. If they took Storm away, how could Ghost follow in this deep snow? He paced in agitation, his hooves striking the drifts. The humans finished rigging the sled and started their engines, a mechanical snarl that made Ghost jump. The first snowmobile lurched forward, towing Storm's makeshift stretcher behind it. Ghost neighed wildly, adrenaline spiking as he saw Storm sliding away. He trotted after them, ignoring the pain in his flank and the exhaustion in his limbs. The humans on the remaining snowmobiles followed behind at a safe distance, possibly to ensure Ghost didn't charge them. As they moved, Ghost kept up, limping slightly on his injured leg. He refused to let Storm out of his sight, even if it meant trotting alongside these roaring machines. The swirling snow parted around them, revealing a few scattered boulders and small clumps of bushes. The sun had fully risen by now, painting the landscape in a bright, icy glow. It was a stark contrast to the bleak night they had endured. After a slow, careful journey across the plains, a rugged outpost came into view, a small shelter or station built for wildlife observation. A few pens stood nearby, and Ghost's heart pounded at the sight of fences. Memories of corrals and captivity flashed through his mind. He pinned his ears back. But the humans continued to move gently, guiding Storm's sled toward one of the pens that looked clean and prepared with straw bedding. Another group of people appeared, some carrying veterinary supplies, others shoveling the pen's entrance to allow the stretcher easier passage. Ghost skidded to a halt outside the pen, tossing his head in alarm. The rescue team carefully pulled Storm inside, unfastened the blankets, and began tending to his injured leg. Ghost paced along the outside of the pen, snorting and chuffing, clearly distressed. The humans worked quickly, applying salves and bandages to Storm's wound, checking his heartbeat, ensuring he was stable. The sedation kept Storm peaceful as they attended to him. All the while, Ghost circled, ignoring his own aches, determined not to abandon his friend. One of the rescuers opened a gate on the far side of the pen, leaving it ajar, then retreated, giving Ghost a chance to enter if he chose. For several moments, Ghost hesitated. The pen was a trap, but inside was Storm, the friend he had nearly died to protect. The choice weighed heavily. He could bolt into the wild and remain free, but that meant leaving Storm, who might never return to the open range with a damaged leg. Or he could step into that enclosure, risking his own freedom, to stay by Storm's side. He took a few cautious steps forward, ears swiveling, body tense. No one tried to corner him. The gate stood open, an invitation, not a demand. Ghost caught a glimpse of Storm lying in the straw, breathing softly. The sight of his companion alive, with humans working to save him, tugged at Ghost's instincts. Finally, with a low nicker, Ghost walked through the gate. He pinned his ears at the humans who tried to approach, spinning away if they got too close, but he didn't leave. Eventually they gave him space. The gate remained open as a gesture of trust, though the humans stood nearby in case Ghost panicked. But he didn't panic. He stood next to Storm, lowered his head, and breathed against his friend's neck, greeting him in that familiar way. Storm stirred slightly under the sedation, blinking blearily and letting out a soft exhale, Over the next few days, the humans tended to Storm's injury, providing warmth, food, and basic medical care. Storm's leg, while badly bruised, wasn't broken, though it would need time to mend. Ghost grew restless, pacing the pen, occasionally letting out calling whinnies that echoed across the plains. Perhaps he wondered if the rest of the herd was nearby, or if they'd moved on forever. The humans kept the gate open if Ghost wanted to leave, but each time he wandered to the threshold, he'd glance back at Storm and decide to stay. The bond between them was unbreakable. Even in captivity, it remained the most important thing. Gradually, Storm regained strength. Each day he could put a little more weight on his leg, and the swelling began to subside. The rescuers, wearing patient expressions, spoke softly around him, ensuring he stayed calm. Ghost watched with guarded fascination, allowing the humans to help Storm but refusing to let them touch him. His wild spirit remained intact, the scars of battles and the memory of wind on the open plains still burning brightly in his eyes. Whenever the humans finished with Storm's care, Ghost would step in, muzzle Storm's mane, and feed with him from the hay. The pen was large enough for him to trot around a bit, shaking off the tension in his muscles. One crisp morning, the humans gently ushered Storm to his feet, guiding him to walk around the pen. Storm limped, but he managed slow, steady steps. Ghost nickered encouragingly, walking beside him. The humans watched with interest, but didn't intervene. As Storm's confidence grew, he moved more fluidly, the therapy aided by the kind environment. An old veterinarian stood at the fence, nodding with approval, as though the dedication of these horses was something special to behold. Word spread among the rescue team about the remarkable loyalty Ghost had shown, refusing to leave Storm behind in the storm. They said it was an incredible display of devotion, a testament to the powerful bonds animals could share. Some who witnessed it dabbed tears from their eyes, moved by the sight of the two Mustangs supporting one another through the worst. Weeks passed in a blur of slow recovery. Storm's leg healed enough that he could bear weight without flinching too badly, and the humans considered releasing him back into the wild. They knew it was the Mustang's rightful home. But the question remained, would Storm be able to survive out there with a vulnerable leg, especially with new storms and predators looming? The rescue team debated, some suggesting that Storm should remain in a protected sanctuary until fully healed, others saying a wild horse deserved freedom above all else. Ghost, in the meantime, showed signs of restlessness. Some mornings, he'd pace near the open gate, staring at the horizon. Yet whenever Storm struggled to rise or walk, Ghost was there, pressing his muzzle against Storm's flank, steadying him. The humans left the decision to nature. If Ghost led Storm away, so be it. If Storm couldn't keep up, they'd bring him back for sanctuary care. One morning, the sky dawned clear, the sun warming the pen. Storm rose to his feet with minimal effort, testing his leg carefully. Ghost trotted in a half circle, as though trying to get Storm to play. Storm let out a short whinny, and though it was a bit clumsy, he took a few tentative steps into a canter. The humans watched, hopeful. Ghost threw his head back, mane flicking in the breeze, and Storm toward the open gate as if to say, "The world awaits us." Storm followed, limping slightly, but determined. With a glance back at the humans, who did nothing to stop them, Ghost led Storm out of the pen. They walked across the open stretch of packed snow near the outpost, stepping onto the plains beyond. The rescue team parted, letting them pass without interference. At first, Storm's gait was hesitant, and Ghost kept his pace slow. But the endless expanse of the plains called to them, that primal freedom beckoning. Step by step, they ventured farther until the outpost lay behind them. The humans remained at a distance, watching with equal measures of awe and concern. Eventually, Ghost and Storm disappeared over a small rise, silhouettes fading into the bright horizon. The land was still formidable, with the last vestiges of winter storms threatening. Wolves and other predators roamed, but the two Mustangs faced it together, as they always had. Their bond, proven unbreakable in the face of nature's fury, was a force that no storm, no injury, and no foe could sever. Days turned into weeks, and occasional sightings by ranchers or trackers suggested that Ghost and Storm stayed together. Storm's limp improved, and though he wasn't as swift as before, he managed to keep up with Ghost's steady pace. They searched for the old herd but found no trace, likely because the herd had migrated to safer grazing grounds. No matter, Ghost and Storm formed their own small band, two survivors forging a path through the wild. In time, curious watchers from the rescue team ventured out and caught glimpses of the pair. They saw Storm frolicking in new grass, his leg healing well. Ghost stood watch, scanning for threats, always near, as if constantly assuring that Storm wasn't left behind. Those who recognized them from the outpost would nod in admiration, touched by the story of these horses who overcame such impossible odds. Legends spread of the storm that nearly claimed them, of Ghost's refusal to abandon his wounded friend, and of the rescue that united human compassion with animal loyalty. Some called Ghost and Storm the bravest horses they'd ever seen. Others insisted it was simply nature at its finest, proving that wild creatures had hearts every bit as strong as their bodies. Regardless of the interpretation, the story resonated across the region. People who had once viewed Mustangs as nuisances or pests began to see them differently, with new respect for the bonds that existed among them. Over time, a few more storms came and went, none so ferocious as that fateful night. With each season's shift, Ghost and Storm wandered the plains, forging deeper into the backcountry. They encountered a few wild herds, sometimes exchanging wary greetings. Ghost, scarred and proud, had no intention of surrendering Storm's safety for a place among strangers. Storm's leg remained slightly stiff, but he adapted, proving that spirit could triumph over physical limitations. On crisp mornings they'd gallop across open fields of grass, Storm a few strides behind, determined to keep up. Though he might never be the fastest or strongest Mustang again, he was alive and free, thanks to Ghost's unwavering devotion. As the wheel of seasons turned, the story of these two horses became a testament to survival against all odds. People who witnessed them crossing ridges or drinking at hidden streams spoke of the remarkable pair. Rangers and conservationists recalled the day they pulled Storm from the jaws of winter, and how Ghost allowed them to help. Children heard the tale and imagined the unstoppable courage of a black stallion who braved a blizzard for his friend. In a world where survival often demanded harsh choices, the refusal of one Mustang to leave his fallen companion behind stood as a reminder that loyalty and empathy could exist even in the untamed wilderness. The bond between Ghost and Storm was an unspoken promise, one that transcended the brutal rules of predator and prey, of storms and hunger. It reminded all who heard it that, at times, compassion could be as fundamental a force as the will to live. After all, Ghost's decision to stay had not only saved Storm but also saved himself, for a life of regret or loneliness would have been a slow death of a different kind. If this story moved you in any way, if you felt the chill of the storm or the heat of the Mustang's courage, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it so that others might discover the incredible power of loyalty and survival. We upload stories like this every day at the same time, and we want you to be part of our journey. Your support means more than you can imagine. From all of us who watched Ghost and Storm defy the very worst of winter's wrath, and from the mighty stallions themselves, thank you for joining us on this perilous ride. May it remind you always of the strength found in unbreakable bonds, and the simple yet profound hope that emerges when no one is left behind.